Harrison Wells sat in the mahogany-paneled office of Dr. Margaret Chen, his hands folded calmly in his lap despite the gravity of the words he had just heard. At 68, the steel magnate had built an empire worth $3 billion, but all his wealth couldn't change the harsh reality of his diagnosis. 6 to 8 weeks, Mr. Wells, Dr. Chen repeated gently. The pancreatic cancer has spread too extensively for treatment to be effective. I'm truly sorry. Harrison nodded slowly, his piercing blue eyes showing no trace of self-pity. He had faced hostile takeovers, economic crashes, and personal tragedies throughout his life. This would simply be his final challenge. Thank you for your honesty, doctor, he said, rising from his chair with the same dignity that had carried him through decades of boardroom battles. As Harrison walked through the streets of Millbrook toward his Bentley, he noticed something that had escaped his attention during years of focused business pursuits. Children, dozens of them, huddled in doorways, sleeping in cardboard boxes, scavenging for food in dumpsters behind restaurants. The sight stopped him cold. In his relentless pursuit of wealth and success, he had become blind to the suffering in his own community. These weren't just statistics from charity reports. They were real children with hollow eyes and tattered clothes, forgotten by a society that had failed them. Harrison had always been a practical man, driven by logic and efficiency. But standing there, watching a young girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old sharing a stale piece of bread with an even younger boy, something fundamental shifted inside him. He had 6 weeks to live. Most men in his position would focus on final trips, family reconciliation, or ensuring their business legacy. Harrison Wells had a different idea entirely. By the time he reached his car, he had made a decision that would shock everyone who knew him and transform the lives of 50 forgotten children. Chapter 2. The announcement. The Millbrook Country Club's monthly board meeting was in full swing when Harrison Wells made his unexpected appearance. The room fell silent as the billionaire entered, his recent absence from social functions having sparked rumors about his health. Harrison took his place at the head of the polished conference table, surveying the faces of his longtime associates, men and women who had built their fortunes alongside his, who had shared decades of business victories and social prominence. "Gentlemen, ladies," Harrison began, his voice carrying the same authority that had commanded respect in corporate boardrooms worldwide. "I have an announcement that will surprise you all." The room's attention was absolute. Harrison Wells rarely spoke without purpose, and his serious demeanor suggested something significant was about to unfold. "I have been diagnosed with terminal cancer. I have approximately 6 weeks to live." Gasps echoed around the room, followed by expressions of shock and sympathy, but Harrison raised his hand for silence. "I'm not here for condolences. I'm here to inform you of my final project. I intend to build a comprehensive children's home for the 50 abandoned children currently living on our streets." The silence that followed was different from before. It was the silence of disbelief rather than respect. Charles Pemberton, the bank president, was the first to speak. "Harrison, surely you're not serious. Such a project would take years to plan and execute properly." "I have 6 weeks," Harrison replied simply. "It will be completed in 5. Margaret Ashford, the mayor's wife, leaned forward with a patronizing smile. "Harrison, perhaps the stress of your diagnosis is affecting your judgment. This is clearly impossible." "I've made my decision," Harrison stated firmly. "The project begins tomorrow." As he left the meeting, Harrison could hear the whispered conversations beginning behind him. He knew they thought he had lost his mind. Perhaps they were right, but he had never felt more certain of anything in his life. Chapter 3. The mockery news of Harrison Wells' ambitious project spread through Millbrook's social circles like wildfire. The reaction was swift and merciless. At dinner parties, charity galas, and business lunches, the town's elite found endless amusement in what they termed Harrison's deathbed delusion. 6 weeks to build a children's home? Laughed Victoria Sterling at the weekly bridge club. The man has clearly lost his faculties along with his health. The local newspaper, owned by Harrison's longtime rival Edmund Blackwood, ran a particularly cruel editorial titled, "When Billions Can't Buy Sanity." The piece suggested that Harrison's illness had affected his mental capacity, and questioned whether someone in his condition should be making such significant financial decisions. Dr. Patricia Morse, the town's leading psychiatrist, was quoted extensively, despite never having examined Harrison. "Terminal diagnoses can cause severe psychological distress," she explained to anyone who would listen. "Grandiose delusions are not uncommon in patients facing mortality." Even Harrison's own board of directors attempted an intervention. They arrived at his estate en masse, led by his longtime business partner, Robert Chen. "Harrison, we're concerned about you," Robert began carefully. "This project, it's not rational. You're talking about spending millions on something that simply cannot be accomplished in the time frame you've set." Harrison listened patiently to their arguments, their pleas for reason, their suggestions for more appropriate final gestures. When they finished, he simply said, The construction begins Monday morning. Meanwhile, the children who would benefit from Harrison's project remained invisible to most of the town's residents. They continued sleeping in alleys, searching for food, and surviving day by day while the adults debated the feasibility of helping them. But Harrison saw them. Every morning, as he drove through the streets planning his project, he counted their faces and strengthened his resolve. Their need was real, immediate, and urgent. Unlike his critics, these children couldn't afford to wait for a more reasonable timeline. The mockery only fueled his determination. He had built an empire by doing what others said was impossible. This would be no different. Chapter 4. Assembling the team. While Millbrook's elite continued their ridicule, Harrison Wells was quietly assembling the most extraordinary construction team the town had ever seen. His first call was to Marcus Rodriguez, a legendary project manager who had overseen the construction of hospitals, schools, and emergency housing in disaster zones worldwide. "Mr. Wells," Marcus said during their video conference, "I've built structures under impossible conditions, after earthquakes, hurricanes, in war zones. But 6 weeks for a facility this size, it's unprecedented. I'm not asking if it's been done before," Harrison replied. "I'm asking if it can be done now." Marcus studied the architectural plans Harrison had commissioned from the world's leading experts in rapid construction. The design was ingenious, modular, efficient, yet warm and welcoming. Everything a group of abandoned children would need: dormitories, classrooms, a medical clinic, recreational areas, and a commercial kitchen. It would require round-the-clock shifts, the most advanced prefabrication techniques, and a coordination effort unlike anything I've ever attempted, Marcus admitted. "Money is no object," Harrison stated simply. "Neither is time. We work 24 hours a day if necessary." Within 48 hours, Marcus had assembled a team of 300 workers from across the country, specialists in rapid construction, prefabrication experts, and logistics coordinators who had worked on emergency relief projects worldwide. Harrison also contacted Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a renowned child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery. "Dr. Mitchell, I need you to design programs that can help these children heal and thrive." "Mr. Wells, institutional care requires careful planning, proper staffing, regulatory approval." "Doctor," Harrison interrupted gently, "these children are living in cardboard boxes. Whatever we create will be an improvement. We'll handle the regulations later." As equipment began arriving at the construction site, a 20-acre plot Harrison owned on the outskirts of town, the mockery intensified. But Harrison noticed something else. A few people were beginning to watch with curiosity rather than amusement. The project was becoming real, and reality had a way of changing perspectives. Chapter 5. Breaking Ground. The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for dawn on a crisp October morning. Harrison had deliberately chosen the early hour, knowing that most of his critics wouldn't bother attending. But as his limousine pulled up to the construction site, he was surprised to see a small crowd gather. Some were curious townspeople who had heard about the project. Others were reporters from regional newspapers, drawn by the unusual story of a dying billionaire's impossible mission. But most surprising were the children themselves, the very ones Harrison was building the home for. They stood at the edge of the property, a ragged group of survivors ranging in age from 6 to 16. Their clothes were dirty, their faces wary, but their eyes held something Harrison hadn't expected to see: hope. Marcus Rodriguez approached with the ceremonial shovel. "Mr. Wells, the site is ready. All permits have been expedited, and the first prefabricated sections will arrive this afternoon." Harrison took the shovel, but instead of immediately breaking ground, he walked toward the children. The crowd watched in silence as the billionaire knelt down to speak with a young girl who appeared to be about 10 years old. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Lucy," she whispered, clutching a stuffed animal that had seen better days. "Lucy, would you like to help me start building your new home?" The girl's eyes widened in disbelief. No adult had ever asked for her help with anything important. She nodded slowly, and Harrison placed his hands over hers on the shovel hand. Together, they broke ground on what would become the Millbrook Children's Haven. As the first shovel of earth was turned, something remarkable happened. The other children moved closer, no longer content to watch from the sideline. Soon, all 50 of them were gathered around Harrison, their small hands touching the shovel, their voices joining in a cheer that echoed across the construction site. The reporters captured every moment, and by evening, the image of a dying billionaire surrounded by hopeful children had spread across social media and news outlets nationwide. The project was no longer just Harrison's dream. It had become a symbol of possibility that was beginning to capture hearts far beyond Millbrook. Chapter 6. The Race Against Time. As construction began in earnest, the scale and intensity of the project became apparent to everyone in Millbrook. The construction site operated 24 hours a day, with massive floodlights turning night into day. The sound of machinery, the arrival of trucks carrying prefabricated sections, and the organized chaos of 300 workers created a spectacle unlike anything the quiet town had ever witnessed. Harrison was on site every day, despite his declining health. He had lost weight, and his once commanding presence had become more fragile, but his determination remained unshakable. He carried architectural plans, consulted with engineers, and made decisions with the same precision that had built his business empire. Dr. Chen had warned him that the stress and physical demands of overseeing such a massive project could accelerate his decline. Harrison's response was simple. "Doctor, I'd rather die building something meaningful than waste away in a hospital." The children had become regular visitors to the construction site. Marcus Rodriguez had initially worried about safety, but Harrison insisted they be allowed to watch their future home take shape. Safety barriers were erected, and hard hats were provided in child sizes. Lucy, the girl who had helped break ground, appointed herself as the unofficial liaison between the children and the construction crew. She would arrive each morning with questions. When will the playground be finished? Will we really have our own beds? Can we paint our rooms any color we want? Harrison answered every question personally, often kneeling down to her level, despite the pain it caused his deteriorating body. "Yes, Lucy, you'll have your own bed, your own space. And yes, you can choose any color you like for your room." The prefabricated sections were arriving daily, massive components that could be assembled like an enormous puzzle. The efficiency was remarkable. Walls, complete with electrical and plumbing systems, were lifted into place by cranes and connected with precision engineering. But even with the advanced construction methods, time was Harrison's greatest enemy. His medical appointments revealed the cancer's relentless progression. Some days, he could barely stand for more than an hour at a time. Yet every morning, he returned to the site, driven by the faces of the children who were counting on him to finish what he had started. Chapter 7. Unexpected Support. As the children's home began to take visible shape, something unexpected happened in Millbrook. The initial mockery and skepticism started giving way to curiosity, then admiration, and finally, active support. It began with small gestures. Mrs. Henderson, who owned the local bakery, started bringing fresh bread and pastries to the construction work. "They're working so hard," she explained to anyone who asked. "It's the least I can do." Tom Bradley, who ran the hardware store, began donating supplies without being asked. "Mr. Wells is paying for everything," he told his wife, "but I want to contribute something too." The transformation was most evident among the town's children. Students at Millbrook Elementary and High School organized fundraisers, not for money. Harrison clearly didn't need financial help, but to purchase toys, books, and games for the future residents of the children's home. Even some of Harrison's former critics began to reconsider their positions. Margaret Ashford, the mayor's wife who had initially dismissed the project as impossible, found herself driving by the construction site daily, watching the remarkable progress. "I was wrong," she admitted to her husband. "I thought Harrison had lost his mind, but he's actually doing it. He's really building that home." The media attention had grown from local curiosity to national interest. News crews from major networks arrived to document the miracle of Millbrook, as it was being called. The story of a dying billionaire racing against time to save 50 abandoned children had captured the public imagination. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the child psychologist Harrison had recruited, arrived to begin planning programs for the children. She was amazed by what she found, not just the impressive construction progress, but the transformation she observed in the children themselves. "They have hope now," he reported to Harrison. For the first time in their lives, they believe that someone cares about their future. Harrison nodded, but his attention was focused on the calendar. 3 weeks had passed since construction began. He had 3 weeks remaining, both for the project and, according to his doctors, for his life. The race was far from over. Chapter 8. The Setback. In the 4th week of construction, disaster struck. A severe storm system moved through the region, bringing high winds and torrential rain that forced work to halt for 3 critical days. When the weather cleared, the construction team discovered significant damage to several partially completed sections. Marcus Rodriguez surveyed the damage with growing concern. "Mr. Wells, we've lost at least a week's worth of progress. Some of the prefabricated sections will need to be completely replaced." Harrison stood in the mud, rain still dripping from his coat, looking at the twisted metal and damaged materials. His face was gaunt, his breathing labored, but his expression remained determined. "How long to get replacement sections?" 2 weeks minimum, Marcus replied, "and that's if we can expedite everything." The implications were clear to everyone present. Harrison didn't have 2 weeks to spare. His latest medical tests had shown the cancer's aggressive progression. Dr. Chen had privately told him that he might have days rather than weeks remaining. Word of the setback spread quickly through Millbrook. The town's skeptics felt vindicated. They had always said the project was impossible. Some even suggested that Harrison should abandon the effort and focus on his final days with family. But Harrison Wells had not built a billion-dollar empire by surrendering to setbacks. That evening, he called an emergency meeting with his entire team. "We're going to finish this project," he announced to the assembled workers, engineers, and contractors. "I don't care if we have to work around the clock. I don't care if we have to rebuild everything from scratch. Those children are counting on." Marcus stepped forward. "Mr. Wells, with respect, even if we work non-stop, the timeline is now impossible. We need to be realistic about—" "Realistic?" Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying an edge of steel despite his physical. "Those children sleeping in cardboard boxes don't have the luxury of being realistic. They need this home, and they need it now." He paused, looking around the room at faces that showed doubt, exhaustion, and concern. "I'm going to ask something of all of you that goes beyond your contracts, beyond reasonable expectation. I'm asking you to help me perform." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Marcus Rodriguez stepped forward. "What do you need us to do?" Chapter 9. The Miracle. What happened next would be remembered in Millbrook for generations. Harrison's plea for a miracle was answered not just by his construction team, but by the entire community. Word spread through the town that the children's home was in jeopardy. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Volunteers arrived at the construction site in numbers that amazed everyone involved. Local contractors brought their crews to work for free. High school students organized shifts to help with cleanup and basic labor. Even elderly residents showed up with thermoses of coffee and homemade meals for the workers. Charles Pemberton, the bank president who had initially ridiculed the project, arrived with a crew of his employees. "We're here to help," he announced simply, avoiding Harrison's surprised gaze. The work pace became extraordinary. With the volunteer help, the construction site now hosted over 500 people working in coordinated shifts. The damaged sections were cleared and rebuilt in record time. Marcus Rodriguez had never seen anything like it. "It's like the entire town has decided to will this project into existence," he told his wife during one of his brief breaks at home. Harrison, despite his deteriorating condition, remained on site to coordinate the efforts. He had set up a chair near the main construction area, and from there, he directed the organized chaos with the same precision he had once applied to corporate mergers. Lucy and the other children had become the unofficial cheerleaders for the project. They created signs encouraging the workers, brought water to volunteers, and their presence served as a constant reminder of why everyone was working so hard. Dr. Chen visited the construction site to check on Harrison's condition. She was alarmed by his appearance, but amazed by his energy and focus. "Harrison, you should be in a hospital," she told him privately. "Doctor, I'll have plenty of time to rest when this is finished," he replied, his eyes never leaving the construction progress. As the 5th week began, something remarkable was happening. The children's home was not only back on schedule, it was ahead of schedule. The combination of advanced construction techniques, round-the-clock work, and unprecedented community support was creating something that seemed impossible just weeks earlier. But Harrison's time was running out faster than one realized. Chapter 10. The Final Week. Harrison Wells collapsed on the construction site on a Tuesday morning during the 5th week of the project. The medical team that rushed him to Millbrook General Hospital delivered news that everyone had been dreading, but expecting. His body was shutting down rapidly. Dr. Chen was blunt with the family members who had gathered. "He has days, possibly hours. The cancer has spread throughout his system, and his organs are beginning to fail." From his hospital bed, Harrison could see the construction site in the distance. The children's home was nearly complete. The main building was finished, the dormitories were ready, and work was progressing on the final details like landscaping and interior furnishing. "I need to be there," Harrison told Marcus Rodriguez during one of his visits. "I need to see it finished." "Mr. Wells, the doctors say—" "I know what the doctors say," Harrison interrupted weakly. "But I made a promise to 50 children, and I intend to keep it." Against all medical advice, Harrison discharged himself from the hospital on Thursday morning. He was transported to the construction site in a wheelchair, accompanied by a nurse and portable medical equipment. The sight of their benefactor's return energized everyone on the site. Workers who had been laboring for weeks without adequate rest found new reserves of energy. Volunteers who had been considering going home for some rest decided to stay for the final push. Lucy and the other children gathered around Harrison's wheelchair. They could see how sick he was, but they also saw his determination to finish what he had started for them. "Mr. Harrison," Lucy said, taking his frail hand in her small one, "we want to help finish our home too." And so, in the final days of construction, the children joined the effort in whatever ways they could. They helped carry small tools, sorted supplies, and provided encouragement to the exhausted workers. The local media documented every moment of what had become known as Harrison's last stand. The image of a dying billionaire surrounded by the children he was saving, all working together to complete an impossible project, had captured the attention of the entire nation. By Friday evening, the Millbrook Children's Haven was complete. Every room was furnished, every system was operational, and every detail had been finished to perfection. Harrison Wells had kept his promise with one day to spare. Chapter 11. The opening day. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. Perfect weather for the opening of the Millbrook Children's Haven. Harrison had insisted on a simple ceremony. No politicians, no speeches, just the children moving into their new home. He was too weak to stand, so his wheelchair was positioned at the front entrance of the beautiful building that had risen from nothing in just 5 weeks. The structure was magnificent, modern yet warm, institutional yet homelike. Everything the children needed to heal and grow. The 50 children who had been living on the streets of Millbrook gathered in front of their new home. They had been cleaned up and given new clothes donated by but their faces still showed the wariness of those who had learned not to trust in good things lasting. Lucy, who had become the unofficial spokesperson for the group, approached Harrison's wheelchair. "Mr. Harrison, is this really ours? Is this really our home?" Harrison's voice was barely a whisper, but his words carried clearly in the morning air. "Yes, Lucy, this is your home, forever." Dr. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward with the keys to the building. She had spent the past week training a staff of caregivers, teachers, and counselors who would help the children transition to their new lives. "Children," she announced, "welcome to your new home." What happened next brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. The children didn't rush forward as expected. Instead, they turned to Harrison, and one by one, they approached his wheelchair to thank him personally. Some hugged him gently, careful not to hurt his frail body. Others simply touched his hand or whispered, "Thank you." A few of the older children spoke about how they had never believed anyone would care enough to help them. When all 50 children had expressed their gratitude, Harrison asked to be wheeled inside the building. He wanted to see them explore their new home, to witness the moment when they realized that their lives had truly changed. The children moved through the building with wonder and disbelief. They saw the dormitories with real beds and clean linens, the classrooms equipped with computers and books, the recreational areas with games and toys, the medical clinic where they could receive proper health care. But perhaps most importantly, they saw something they had never experienced before, a place where they belonged, where they were wanted, where they could build a future. Harrison watched from his wheelchair, his mission finally. Chapter 12. The Legacy. Harrison Wells passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 days after the opening of the Millbrook Children's Haven. He died in his own bed, surrounded by family, with the knowledge that his final project had been completed successfully. His funeral was unlike anything Millbrook had ever seen. The church was packed with mourners from every level of society: business leaders, construction workers, community volunteers, and most prominently, 50 children who had lost the man who had saved their lives. Lucy spoke at the service, her young voice carrying clearly through the packed church. "Mr. Harrison gave us more than a home," she said. "He gave us hope. He showed us that someone believed we were worth saving." The Millbrook Children's Haven thrived under Dr. Mitchell's leadership. The children who had once lived on the streets began to heal from their traumas, excel in their studies, and dream about futures they had never thought possible. Within a year, the first group of older children had graduated from high school and received college scholarships. The younger ones were excelling in their studies and participating in activities they had never had the opportunity to try before. The community of Millbrook had been transformed by the experience. The project had brought people together in ways that lasted long after Harrison's death. Volunteer programs continued, community support remained strong, and the town had developed a new sense of pride and purpose. Charles Pemberton, who had initially mocked the project, became the chairman of the Haven's board of directors. "Harrison taught us all something about what's truly important," he said during the first anniversary celebration. The story of Harrison Wells and the Millbrook Children's Haven spread far beyond the small town. It inspired similar projects in other communities and became a symbol of what could be accomplished when determination met compassion. Marcus Rodriguez, who had overseen the impossible construction project, established a nonprofit organization dedicated to rapid construction of emergency housing and facilities for children in crisis. But perhaps the most important legacy was visible in the faces of 50 children who had learned that they mattered, that they were valued, and that their lives had infinite potential. Harrison Wells had spent his life building a business empire, but his greatest achievement was built in just 5 weeks. A home where love replaced abandonment, hope replaced despair, and 50 forgotten children discovered they were worth saving. Chapter 13. Full Circle. 5 years after Harrison Wells's death, the Millbrook Children's Haven had become a model for child welfare institutions across the country. The beautiful facility that had been built in just 5 weeks continued to provide a home for children in need, though many of the original 50 residents had moved on to successful independent lives. Lucy, now 15 years old, had become a leader among the younger children and an honor student at Millbrook High School. She often spoke to visitors about her memories of the construction project and the man who had changed her. "People ask me what I remember most about Mr. Harrison," she would say. "It wasn't his money or his big house. It was the way he looked at us, like we mattered, like we were worth fighting for." The Haven had expanded its programs to include job training, college preparation, and support services for young adults transitioning to independence. Many of the original residents returned regularly to volunteer and mentor the newer children. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had documented the remarkable outcomes achieved by the Haven's residents. The success rate was unprecedented. Over 90% of the children who had lived there went on to complete their education and establish stable, productive lives. The construction site where the miracle had occurred was now a beautiful campus with gardens, playgrounds, and additional buildings that had been added over the years. A bronze statue of Harrison Wells stood near the main entrance, surrounded by plaques bearing the names of all the children who had found hope with. Marcus Rodriguez visited every year on the anniversary of the project's completion. He had gone on to build emergency facilities around the world, but he always said that the Millbrook Children's Haven remained his greatest professional achievement. The town of Millbrook had embraced its role as the home of this remarkable story. Tourism increased as people came to see the place where a dying billionaire performed a miracle in 5 weeks. But more importantly, the community had maintained its commitment to caring for vulnerable children. On the 5th anniversary of Harrison's death, the entire town gathered for a celebration at the Haven. Former residents who were now in college or starting careers returned to share their stories. Community members who had volunteered during the construction project reminisced about those extraordinary 5 weeks. As the sun set over the beautiful facility that had once seemed impossible, Lucy stood before the assembled crowd to deliver the keynote address. She was no longer the frightened, homeless child who had helped break ground 5 years earlier. She was a confident young woman, with dreams of becoming a doctor and returning to help other children in need. "Mr. Harrison taught us that miracles aren't magic," she said, her voice strong and clear. "They're what happen when someone cares enough to do the impossible. He showed us that love isn't just a feeling, it's action. And the greatest action is believing that every child deserves a chance to succeed." The applause that followed echoed across the campus, where 50 forgotten children had found their home, their hope, and their future. Harrison Wells's legacy lived on in every life that had been transformed, every dream that had been realized, and every child who had learned they were worth saving. His final project had indeed been completed in 5 weeks, but its impact would last forever. Thank you so much for listening to our story about Harrison Wells and the incredible miracle of the Millbrook Children's Haven. This tale reminds us that even in our final moments, we have the power to create lasting change and touch lives in ways we never imagined. Harrison's determination to help 50 forgotten children shows us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we impact and the hope we